Hello and welcome to a brand new, fresh episode of Where Do We Begin, the podcast where we have a chat to some of Australia's best and most interesting sporting personalities. But this episode, it's a bit different today. I've spoken about the Where Do We Begin mansion a few times in the show, but hate to break it to you, but we don't actually live or record in a mansion. We're in a bit of a dungeon, I have to say. Very dimly lit, very dark. Can't usually see too much in the middle of nowhere. Not great, but the darkness is always brightened up by the man opposite me. There's always light emanating from the big bubbly personality that is my co-host Jackson. But I hate to say it, but he can't make it tonight. So we haven't got too much squad depth here at Where Do We Begin? So it's just me. You're stuck with me, and I should introduce myself actually. If you're one of the few people who doesn't listen to the show, my name's Harper. And so we've got an absolutely massive guest that I should tell you about because I'm waffling on a bit. Our guest today is Barry Stoneham. He's an absolute great of Aussie rules. If you know anything about Aussie rules in the 80s and 90s, you know Barry Stoneham. He played in 2 grand finals for the Cats. He was best and fairest, all-Australian. Just an absolute legend, centre-half forward for the Cats, played more than 220 games. So I think I'm going on a bit too much here. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I know that Jackson will be absolutely gutted to be missing out on this episode because we've got an absolutely huge guest. He's a legend of the Geelong Cats Footy Club. And if you've listened to the show, you'll know he and I go way back. So, Barry Stoneham, welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice to be back, Harper. Thanks very much, and good to speak to you.
Yes, great to have you on. So, we're in lockdown at the moment here in Melbourne. Are you in Melbourne or are you a bit out in Geelong still?
I'm actually down at Port Lonsdale way. We've actually just cut a long story short. Our house in Melbourne is sort of under quarantine as well due to insurance. So work's been happening the last 6 months, which is going very slowly, and we can't live in there. So we're down at Port Lonsdale, which is not a bad place to isolate. Yeah, not bad at all. But back in lockdown, when the whole country was in lockdown, what did you get up to? Oh, look, I'm still working, so I'm one of the lucky ones, I suppose, that I'm still working full time. I work for a consultancy company in Melbourne, and obviously all working remotely from home. So just working from home every day at the moment, or from Port Lonsdale every day. Talking with clients, a lot of meetings. So it's sort of been still pretty busy as far as meetings go. A bit more challenging work-wise, but look, I'm sort of very fortunate to actually still have a full-time job at the moment.
Yeah, that's very good. So obviously in Port Lonsdale, but Geelong boy, born and bred, but it's it's not quite a big city, but it's not quite a little country town. So what was it like growing up there?
Oh, look, it was fantastic. It's, as you say, it's got bigger now the last few years since I was growing up. It's really developed a lot. A lot of people are relocating down this way in Geelong and also all the different coasts, but yeah, it's a great spot. So I actually was lucky enough to be a born and bred Geelong person. And back in those days, there was no draft. So it was more or less a zone situation where obviously you play in Geelong as far as local footy goes. You're going to go and play Geelong Footy Club if you're lucky enough. So, it was a great little town. When I say little town, it's actually really big now and a lot of population. But I was a St Joey's College boy. A lot of schoolmates are still mates of mine down here. I moved to Melbourne, I'd say about 20 years ago, but my family's still in Geelong and I've never left. So, I'm down here as much as I can be.
Yeah, you mentioned it briefly there, no draft back then. So some of our younger listeners might not know how it worked. So can you explain the zone system a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose for my case, when you're a young guy playing footy at the local schools, and they had a scholarship squad for Geelong scholarship squad under 16s. And then as you went along, sort of Teal Cup was back in, that was I think under 17 Victorian state representative. And then you more or less get invited down by Geelong Footy Club if you're lucky to train with the under 19s. And back in those days, the under 19s was very, very competitive. There was a lot of local players and also country guys from different parts of Victorian country who were zoned to Geelong. So, for example, Cobram, Baruga, or Cobram in particular, where the Hawkins were from, Stephen and Buddha, and Johnny Barnes. Johnny Barnes came later, but Buddha and Steve were actually Geelong zone. So a number of these sort of people who would train for the under-19s and try and get on the list initially. And if you did get on there, then you actually make your way through the ranks if you could. So under-19s means reserves, and if on odd occasion you might be invited by the senior coach at the time to train with the senior squad as a young 17 or 18-year-old, which was quite daunting back then. But it was great also because they would invite all the local players from all the different clubs that you know and grew up with. So you'd be training with mates of yours who might play for Grovedale or St Joey's or St Mary's or somewhere. So it was quite a good place to be and quite a good environment.
Was there much of a rivalry between Melbourne and Geelong? Because I guess Melbourne might have been viewed, especially back then, as the bigger brother with most of the Victorian teams and biggest city. Was there much of a rivalry?
Yeah, look, there probably was. Certainly more so back then, I think, because I think back in those days, going to Melbourne was a big trip. These days, you sort of people commute every day and it's nearly joining up. It's that close together. So, yeah, when you're younger and playing footy, and certainly to go to Melbourne and play footy was exciting in a way when you're a young guy coming through the ranks. When we played footy early days, we'd get a bus up together as a footy club to Melbourne, and obviously the bus back, which really, in my opinion, really created a great bond and culture within the footy club. But there was a sort of rivalry because, again, as you're a young guy growing up or a young girl, even when you go out, when you're a young person, we never went out to Melbourne. If we did, it was a really big excursion. So it was sort of one of those things where Geelong was our town, and we sort of kept pride in that fact that it was our own. But on odd occasion, go to Melbourne for the weekend and really enjoy it.
Yeah. So I guess everyone's a Geelong fan out there?
No, not all. I mean, a lot are obviously, but there's also that element of other clubs. I mean, it depends who their parents might have supported when they were younger. I'm not sure the percentage-wise, but I'd say a good 60-70% Geelong supporters, even if not more. But it certainly is other clubs around that they do follow. But yeah, it's certainly when you drive down to a game these days or any days over the years, you certainly see a lot of blue and white scarves and beanies coming out of the houses, walking out of Geelong Park, which is a great feeling. And even these days, when not this year, of course, but over the years, I do a lot of corporate functions for the footy club with Billy Brownless, and we host a lot of their functions. And it's just one of those unique environments to go down to a regional town, regional city, and still have their own footy club, and to walk in and have that real atmosphere, a bit like the old days of Windy Hill at Essendon and Princess Park for Carlton and these ones. There's something special about it, for sure.
Yeah, so first season, 1986, how did you find out that you'd been recruited to the Cats?
Yeah, well, I actually played, so in 1985 I played for my local footy club, which is St Joseph's Football Club in the GFL. They are now. They were in the GDFL back then. So I played in the seniors that year. Sorry, 84 it was, and played in my only senior premiership when I was 16 with them. And then the following year, 85, went to Geelong under-19s and reserves. So I played reserves that year in 85, played in the final against Essendon at VFL Park. Terry Danaher, I think, was in there, and Simon Madden, these senior players were in the reserves final for some unknown reason. And in 86, I was probably about 81, 82 kilograms, so very tall and skinny. And I'm not sure exactly what round it was, but I sort of was invited by the coach in 85 to train with the squad, which was Tom Hafey. And in 86, John Devine took over. And I remember John ringing up my family and sort of telling me at training as well, but ringing the parents, sort of saying, we're going to play Barry on Saturday. It was against Footscray, and it would have been early rounds of that year. So it was pretty exciting. And, to be a young Geelong boy and to play the club you love and used to go and watch every week was a really exciting thing.
Yeah, you mentioned there Tom Hafey, sacked in 85, I think, and John Devine, it was his first season, same season as your first season. So what was the atmosphere like with it being his first season and I guess a new era?
Yeah, look, it was exciting. I mean, John was he's a premiership player for the Cats in 1963, and a great man, Johnny. I know his family pretty well, like his son Todd and Aaron, and I saw his daughters and his wife. So he sort of knew them over time. and have a local guy, he's a Colac boy originally from memory, to come back to the club, premiership star, real tough, hard man, but a ripping guy. It was exciting for the club. So it was someone who the club knew, the town knew, and it was good for him and good for me as a young guy. I mean, we had a few young guys sort of in that era. I think Billy came down the same year. So we sort of had a mix of older and young. So it was a good blend. And it was just sort of one of those things that, as a young guy, 18 and, sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I was pretty quiet. You don't want to sort of take too much out of line, training with all the senior boys. I went down, as I said before, I went down with my sisters every home game since I was 6 or 7 years old. And they were my heroes, and I ended up playing and training with some of the guys who I idolised as a young kid. So that was quite a daunting factor at the time. I was probably a little bit fortunate in the way that I also did some athletics on the off-season, and Andrew Buse and a couple of these guys who are stars at Geelong also did athletics. So I sort of half knew them before I got down there, which helped me a little bit.
Yeah, well, some of the players that you idolised, I guess you don't know them personally, but you know their playing style, being a big Cats fan. So do you reckon that would have been like massively, massively different if you went to a Collingwood or an Essendon or something?
Would have been a little bit different because I just loved the club that I played for. So, again, I think wherever you go, you're more than happy to go and more than delighted to go. But I think for me, it was just a little bit more special to grow up as a Geelong person. We lived sort of probably 1K from the ground when I started playing. So I could walk down to training. And my parents Dad was a Geelong man from day one. So we sort of grew up loving the town and loving the club. So it was one of those things where it would have been different playing for someone else, but still would have been equally as exciting. But my first game when I did play in the seniors, I reckon it would have been 90 to 100 mates, all some Joey's guys from the club, all came down and watched, which was, again, just very special.
Yeah, so looking into it a bit, I saw that between 82 and 88, the Cats finished 9th, 6th, 9th, 6th and 9th. And that was the era where it was top 5 making finals. So do you reckon that added to a real hunger for glory, taking that next step, getting into finals?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was, as you say, a bit of a lean decade, the 80s. I recall as a young guy watching them and going to the Collingwood prelim finals, one in 80 and 81, I think it might have been. We played them 2 years in a row and should have certainly won one of them at least from memory. But then from there on, it was pretty lean. And then you mentioned Tom Hafey leaving end of 85. And with him, I think, went Greg Williams, Brendan Toohey, David Bolton to Sydney. So there were real changes in the guard. There was big changes. And, it was Jacko was there at the time in 86, I think, Mark Jackson. We had young Gary Ablett was there. So it was sort of a real mix of people. And it was sort of exciting with John coming to the club, as I said before, with being a ex-Geelong person. We didn't have a successful 3 years, really. As you said, we didn't really make the finals. But I think we sort of had some good young players coming through the system at that time.
Do you reckon you underachieved with Devine as head?
Good question. Underachieved. Maybe we sort of we were thereabouts. We weren't the best team in the league, so we probably shouldn't have been playing top finals. We might have sort of snuck in. I know in 87, playing at Hawthorn at the last round, actually, we had to win to get into the final. So we were thereabouts, and I think we were about 3 goals up with 5 minutes to play and we got beaten. So the Hawthorn rivalry, talking of rivalries, in my mind, started years ago. And that was one of the years when it was really, they always beat us at the most important games. But yeah, we sort of, I think we were just a bit of a team and a club going through a big change. And as I said, myself and Billy and a couple of other young guys coming through, we were only still very young and raw. When I played the first 2 or 3 years, I didn't play every game in the seniors. You got dropped a couple of times. You'd play in the back pocket or ruck or half forward flank. So you weren't sitting in one spot. So it made it a little bit more challenging as a young player to settle in one spot and get a real good run of it. But we had some good players. Mick Turner was the captain. We had some really good players in that era, but just didn't quite get in the final.
So 1989, Blighty comes in and you really rocket up the ladder. How much of a culture change is there in the club to get that massive boost so quickly?
Yeah, it was a big change. It was, and again, John did a good job and great guy. But Malcolm came in with a massive aura about him, being an external player and being a Brownlow medalist and being a star that he was, and a real student of the game. And this fresh face coming down, I think the whole town sort of changed a bit of mindset as far as this could be an exciting era. And again, with players like in my age group, it was our third or fourth year. So by that stage, you sort of want to be developing a little bit if you're going to be a good player, and it's going to last a few years, because you get to sort of 2021, that's where a group of young players need to sort of take the next step. And Malcolm being the astute judge on footy, he was commentating, I think, the year before as well. So watched a lot of Geelong games and identified certain players where he thought would be able to play where. And it was a pretty exciting time for the whole club when Malcolm arrived, and you can sort of just feel it take another step up.
So with that new coach, did he give you any personal challenges or goals to set yourself that year?
Yeah, he did, actually. He did. We sat down, and as I said, I was pretty slight in the early days, and he sort of said, for one thing, was to try and build up a little bit without going too big. So a bit more time in the gym. But he also said to me, and I won't never forget it, but he said he wants to play me centre half forward, which I hadn't played there really before. He'd been watching me in the commentary box the year before. And he also said, we'll give you at least 10 weeks at that spot. So if you have an ordinary game, we won't drop you, because we'll give you the confidence. And to me, that really helped. And I think he probably said to every young player that we're going to persevere with this young group. Gary Hocking, Robert Scott, Billy, myself, Shane Hamilton, a few of these guys. So he certainly, and he started teaching us the little 1%ers of things you never really think about, how you tie your shoelaces on the side of the boot, and how to actually aim for the right-hand goal post, and all those little things that you sort of don't even sort of think about when you're playing football. But he was a very, very astute person regarding everything, preparation-wise and also game plan-wise. So
you mentioned you moved from centre-half back to centre-half forward. It's happened a bit in more modern times, but how often had it happened before you?
Before me, as far as changing spots?
Yeah, swinging from to the other end.
Yeah, look, I'm not really sure as far as other players at other clubs. When you look at, again, growing up, Paul Vanderhaar and Peter Knights and all these guys, they seem to play in a one spot most of the time. They might go down to a centre, from a centre back to centre forward for a pinch hit occasionally. But you always sort of, growing up, watch these guys go head to head and have duels every time they played each other, Hawthorn, Essendon, those two players. And Malcolm Blight would probably be different. Blight, he played everywhere, centre forward, full back, the whole lot. But I think the era was changing where you had to be a bit more versatile in the late 80s and 90s. And obviously nowadays they're even more versatile. But I think you sort of had to have more than one string to your bow, because if you weren't working somewhere, you need to probably change it up and go to a different spot to be more valuable to the team.
So the Cats, while you were there, lost 4 grand finals. You didn't play in all of them, unfortunately. But did you ever think that you were going to win a grand final? Were you a bit? Do you reckon you got a bit cocky, maybe?
No, not cocky. Not cocky. I think we certainly always thought we were a chance to win one. We always, every year, go into it, and we were up to finals most years in that 99 all the way through. We might have missed 1 or 2 years, but we were always a chance. We sort of got asked that question a lot, obviously. We had lost 4 in 7 years, 89, 92, 4 and 5. And again, this is no excuse whatsoever, but when you look back at those years, I think certainly 94 and 5 we were the second best, if not the third best. Obviously second best, we made the grand final. But the Eagles and Carlton Footy Club were 2 dominant forces. Then 92 was probably our best opportunity to win in hindsight, because we were more mature. We were leading at half time. We certainly were we were probably 23, 24 at that stage as well. So you knew the game pretty well. We certainly always had confidence of succeeding, that's for sure. And Malcolm had that attitude as well. After 4 losses, it got a bit harder. The town certainly found it very difficult, and the players did after losing 4. And they probably had a bit of a change up of players after that. And obviously, Gary Ayres came in for the 4th grand final, 95, as coach.
How much did the drought and the streak of losing grand finals play on your mind as you made the next one and the next one?
Yeah, look, it was. We didn't really impact us mentally. I don't think it was more part of the town really, because they were impatient. Obviously, the last premiership was 63, which is a long time before that. So every year when we lost, the support was still there, and every year they came back. But as we lose the grand finals, they get a bit more impatient, and they certainly. I suppose going into 94 and 5, they went in as a spectator and supporter, a little bit anxious. Whereas as players, you don't. I mean, every time you cross that line, you always thought you were a chance to win, regardless how good the opponents were. So we never. I didn't. Hopefully, the other players didn't. But I know I didn't go into a game thinking, we lost last year. We just more it's a new year, new game, and you just go for it. So we just, unfortunately, I was listening to actually Peter Riccardi talking the other day somewhere, and he mentioned the same thing because he played 92, 4 and 5. He said, look, it's just one of those things. This weren't good enough in the end. It burns away at me. You'll always regret not winning one. But we had the opportunity to be there. It was a great experience. Not great at the end of the game, but we're lucky enough to play there anyway. So some players don't get a chance to play in a grand final.
Yeah, obviously a one-team town, like you mentioned, just the Cats out in Geelong. How much do you reckon that factor, being the one-team town, increases the pressure on the team, do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I think there's a bit of pressure. There's no doubt about that. But, it goes with the territory. Geelong is a small town, really. You go down the milk bar or go buy a paper or a cafe and get a coffee. You are recognised, whereas Melbourne, you're probably not as much. But again, that's all part of the deal. It's you choose to play the game, and spectators in general are very, very good. Supporters have been awesome over the years. You might get one or two who have a crack at you over the years too, but that's all part of it. They pay their money. But the supporters have been great. They certainly support you when going good or poorly most of the time. But I think that extra pressure was just sort of there subconsciously in a way, because we'd lost, we hadn't won since 63, so the town was crying out for a premiership. And I think in those days when we were playing, things were pretty tough in the economy for Geelong, where Pyramid was the building society went down, Ford was battling a little bit. Things weren't going that strongly. We lost a couple of grand finals. They needed a bit of a boost. And we couldn't really, certainly week to week in the finals until grand final day we could actually provide it. But when we lost the main one, a lot of people were pretty disappointed. Yeah,
so you missed the 94 and 95 grand finals through injury, and that was so you didn't play for the first half of 94, and then you played about 8 games, I think, and then a leg break at the end of 94. So, and then out for a couple of years until 96. So, how much did the leg break and just not being able to play affect your mental health?
Yeah, look, it did, and again, in hindsight, when you look at it now and you think about it now, it really did. Nothing bad, but back in the game, those days were like 25 or so years ago. It wasn't sort of recognised back then. And you're right, 94, when I was at the peak of my career at the time, I just finished off a really good 93 end of the year. We didn't make the finals, but I was playing reasonable football and I was feeling good. And 94, I think I did my calf the first few weeks, sort of recurring calf injury. And then got back into it, and as you say, broke my leg and ankle at the same time towards the end of the season. So, having missed the finals, I was vice captain at the time as well, and I did try to come back for the finals. And again, looking back, probably shouldn't have tried at all. And then 95 missing. It certainly was a tough period. You're a young guy, you're 25, 26. Things were going pretty well in your footy career, and all of a sudden it stops. And I think also due to my, I suppose, enduring injuries and a lot of impact, a lot of effect as far as infections and a lot of operations afterwards made it a bit harder for me because it wasn't a clean break, it wasn't a clean operation. I wasn't back in 6 months' time or 10 weeks' time. I more or less missed 2 years. So it was pretty tough. I was captain in 95, didn't play a game. And I suppose watching 2 grand finals we got belted by both Eagles and Carlton being on the sidelines made it all the more challenging for me at the same time.
So being out for so long, what kind of support did you get from the club or your family or your mates? How much did you get?
I got plenty, that's for sure. So all those 3 areas, family, 100%, as you'd expect, 150%. No dramas. Friends, same, most definitely. Really close to the people. So, and the club was the same. And they had the physios, they had the doctors, they had everyone they could help. There's no doubt about that. It was up to probably me to try and deal with it. I suppose now, when you look at these days and the last probably 15, 20 years, the things that are in place for the players via the Players Association, they went back in place in those days. So they had access to every professional possible, which they should. So it's a big industry, and they need that as a young guy, but wasn't as strong as it probably is these days back then. But the support I had for family, friends, and immediate football club was amazing. So there was no issue whatsoever. It's one of those things you got to work through as a young person and to get these challenges at different parts of your life.
Flipping over from a bit of an individual low light to some individual highlights, BNF in 1990 and All-Australian in 92. How careful do you have to be not to let those individual honours affect you and maybe get a bit cocky?
Yeah, look, I think, one thing is, I know if you ever did, your mates and your teammates and your family will bring you down. And again, I think that's the beauty of how I grew up was the mates I had outside of football, from St Joey's and other parts. I still do, keep very close contact with a lot of them, and even more so back then. And they sort of obviously talk footy, but other things outside of footy. So if you've got to be cocky, they'd put you in the line straight away. That was a great thing about it. And look, I wasn't that sort of person either, I don't think, to get ahead of myself, because I was very lucky to be in a situation. You know, you enjoy life, there's no doubt. You're on top of the world when you're young, in your 20s, and you're playing state football with the best in the business, and getting the best and fairest, and that sort of thing was fantastic. And it was just one of those things where everything seemed so good and so so perfect at the time, because you're young. There was no real stresses other than getting a kick on the next week. So yeah, look, it was one of those things. Just the environment around me, people around me, really helped that cause.
Yeah, you mentioned state footy there. The state of origin obviously hasn't been around in its old form for quite a while now. Not in my lifetime, I don't think. But what was that like? Was it just a bit of a, I'll go do this, but I don't really care? Or was it a massive honour to pull on the big V shirt?
No, massive honour. Massive honour. It was one of the biggest highlights of my career, if not the biggest. I mean, certainly playing grand finals up there, probably number one. State footy was amazing. And I recall a game, you mentioned how first game at Geelong. Well, the first Victorian game, I remember Ted Whitten Sr., who we sort of knew because he used to commentate. It was called 3GL and now it's called K-Rock, a radio station in Geelong. So he was down here every week. So we sort of half knew him just from that, but he was bigger than life. And I remember calling my father on a Thursday night at their home and sort of said, yep, I've been picked. So state footy was incredible. We used to drive up with as a group. There was a few of us from Geelong actually got selected over those years. We get Busey and Neville Bruns and Robert Scott and Couchy. And a few of us would drive up there as a group, played at the MCG on a weeknight, and you walk out and there's Plugger Lockett and, obviously Gary Ablett and all these stars around. Excuse me. And it was one of those things where we'd play on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night in Footy Park or at the Wacker in Perth or Subiaco or MCG against Adelaide, in South Australia in 89. So it was massive buzz. And yet the crowds, I think I played in that 89 one where we beat South Australia by a huge margin. There was 90,000 people there. And they had, I think it was Lockett and Ablett in the forward line and Ben McBurton in the centre forward and all these guys. So yeah, it's one of those things you cherish as an ex-player. Andy Collins, we in the program not long ago together, we played state footy a number of times. So it was funny back then. You'd play on a Saturday at Geelong, you'd fly to Perth or South Australia, play on a Tuesday night, come back Wednesday, and then play Saturday at Geelong again. So it was 3 games in a week, but you just felt so good. You felt on top of the world.
Do you reckon there's any chance we'll be able to get it back in its old form ever again?
Oh, I don't think, not the old form, I don't think. No, which is a pity, but it's a national comp. So it's sort of, you've got the Eagles and Dockers and Crows, and they've got their own sort of half-state teams, I suppose, in a way. So you won't get it back, I don't think, as it used to be. Although, I think there's a fair bit of noise around getting the state of origin potentially back at some stage, but it's just different times back then. I mean, again, it's big money these days, and it's someone goes down with an injury, it's a big loss to the club financially as well, and also to the performance of the team. And I just think it's a different mentality now. But it's one thing that I'm so glad and happy that I was a part of in my career. It's irreplaceable for me.
Now, I'd say you would have played on a bit in the state of origin, and well known for having a bit of a massive media rivalry, at least with him. Glenn Jakovich, how much was that a rivalry, like in real life, as opposed to just a media beat up around it?
No, it was big as far as playing on him, for sure. I mean, personally, all good. I don't know that well to the different states, but certainly state footy. And he played, I mentioned Teal Cup. Teal Cup back in 85. We were the first Victorian team that you would know this name probably. You're very young. Slug Jordan was the coach, Victorian coach at the time, the late Slug Jordan. I think we were the first Victorian team to be beaten in the grand final, and Western Australia beat us.
Oh, wow.
And they had the likes of Peter Sumich, Chris Lewis, Glenn Jakovich, all these guys playing, John Worsfold in the under-17. And they were big boys. But so from there on, Glenn Jakovich and I, he was centre back, I was centre forward, and we were playing each other twice a year for many years. And he was a champion footballer. They were a champion club and team. They were tough and hard and skillful and big, strong boys. So the rivalry between Jacko and I was strong, and you love that. I think you see the footy these days, and you see the midfielders like Cripps and Bontempelli and these guys go head to head. That's what you want. You want to see every time 2 teams meet, you got 2 players that go head to head every time. And Jacko and I, we were that, I think, and also Stuart Lowe and myself against St Kilda and Geelong. It was one of those things where when we played St Kilda, I'd play in Stewie Lowe. So it was a great thing, and 2 great players, that's for sure.
Now, I've got to ask, you wore number 26 for most of your career, but having a look at it, on your debut, you wore number 53. So what was that about?
Right. Yeah, look, I honestly don't really know. I think when I played reserves, I think I was 63. Then 53 were in the list in 86. And again, you don't really think about the number at the time. You don't really care what number you get if you get on the list and have your first game. But that didn't last too long, 53. And again, it's great to have 26 for a few reasons. One, because it sort of began to own your own number, and it became pretty important for me now that it still is 26. And I watched Tommy Hawkins very, very closely, and you sort of have a funny little affiliation to the guys who wear your number. And I remember going as a young guy, watching, I said before, when I went down as a young kid, well, Jack Hawkins wore 26, and he was one of my favourite players. And then to get his number, and now his son wears it, it's quite a special thing. And it's just nice to watch him get Tommy going so well. And as I said, you rarely see these young guys, but when you do, you sort of got that special connection.
Yeah, not too many famous number 53s, but I noticed Lee Matthews wore number 53 for one game, actually. In 1973, he wore number 53 against Carlton, which was just for one game. Bit weird. But
well, there you go. So, I mean, esteemed company.
Yeah, exactly. Up there with the best. But so you spoke of Tom Hawkins. Have you taken up much of a mentoring role with any players at the Cats since you retired?
No, look, I haven't really. No, it's I did get involved in the on-field side for a year in actually 2006, which wasn't a good year, so maybe it was me. Bomber was the coach. Bomber coached me my last year, and he was great for me. He kept me on when I probably could have been finished up. and we had a great relationship back then. 06, he approached me to become like a part-time ruck coach / big man coach, one night a week, and then on match days become a runner. So I did that, and I enjoyed it actually. But the hardest thing, because you work full time outside of football clubs, I didn't go into the coaching area when I finished. I sort of preferred to go into other areas of work. So I never really became an assistant coach, but I had that opportunity to sort of help. Like Stephen King was in the ruck, and a couple of other young guys. Matty McCarthy was like a young forward coming through. So you sort of try and help these young guys when you could, but I haven't really been involved with players on field over the last few years. And because they have, that's like 10, I suppose, coaches really, with development coaches and assistant coaches and VFL coaches. So it's a very big. We've got a big group of very experienced and talented coaches who can do the job. So I certainly watch closely Geelong games and Geelong how they go. As I said, Billy and I are still involved, keeps your finger on the pulse a little bit in the corporate functions, but nothing on field.
Now, captain for 4 years, but one of those injuries sidelined, of course. But how did the captaincy affect the new role? How did it affect your mindset and change your mindset?
Firstly, it was a great honour to be captain, no doubt about that. That's one again, it's up there with the best of them. And my only regret with that is I couldn't be at my best as a player when I was captain. I was certainly did what I could. Hopefully, I was a reasonable captain, but because I'd been out for 2 years and I came back, it took me a long time to get back into it. And I think if I'd have been full fitness, no injuries, and captain, I sort of think now that I could have probably had a better contribution to the team as far as more on the ground, more stats or more marks or more kicks or more of an influence on the game. Not that I was still an influence on the game. I was still being played. But I think when you're captain, you like to be your best. And I did my best. Certainly, it did take me a while to get back from injuries. And at times, I suppose, when you look back, you probably did play in your mind a little bit to think, well, you're the captain of the team. You've got to actually lead from the front performance-wise. And at times, I was a bit limited because of time away from the game and then coming back and have a few other injuries due to that absence, if that makes sense. You miss 2 years, you always come back with other injuries, soft tissue and other parts of your body. So it was a fantastic time to be a captain. I loved it, but I just wish I sort of had been a better player for the captain.
Now, I'm not sure if you'd been captain of any, like your junior clubs before, but did you have much of a leadership personality in your junior days?
Yeah, I think I did. Sort of, it was a natural thing over the years. And like I was vice captain when I was sort of early sort of mid-20s at Geelong with Mark Bestow captain. So I think as I grew as a player and a person, I think just naturally the leadership side came into it. And I sort of like to think it still sort of flows through to sort of life now. But I didn't really. I sort of as a junior, as a young kid, you'd sort of be a captain because I was tall, I was under 13s and 14s and all these. You get junior players, if you're tall and you can get a kick, you play pretty well. So you sort of, you're probably one of those more or less leaders of the young kids without even knowing it. But I think the early years as a vice captain and playing with some of those names I've mentioned, who I look up to still now, and great mates, but great leaders, I think that helps you a lot.
Now, retirement in 2000, was that all your decision or did the club kind of push you into it a bit?
Look, I think it was a combination of both and the wise move. It was, I was sort of very close to finishing the year before. Injuries had taken its toll. I remember at 98, I snapped my Achilles. I had 2 groin operations in a year or so before that. So I was sort of, with my agility, and that's what I sort of based my game on a lot of times, was my running and agility and jumping sort of diminished quite a bit. So wasn't the player I used to be. End of 99, I was certainly more or less, the club spoke to me and it was more or less curtains. And then Bomber Thompson, who became the new coach, wanted me to stay on for another year to sort of help and influence some of the younger guys. And it wasn't like an automatic game. If I wasn't playing well, I wouldn't be playing, which is fair enough. But that sort of kept me another year. I was close to going to Carlton, actually, end of 99. I remember I met David Parkin at Spargo's in Richmond, Bridge Road. So having a chat about potentially going to Carlton for a similar role. But much as I sort of was very appreciative of that, I'm so happy I stayed at Geelong as a one club player.
How tempted were you to go to the Blues?
I was tempted because I thought my time at Geelong was up because obviously the club had more or less said, it's probably time to go in a nice way, and that's what everyone gets at eventually. So I was reasonably close to going, but then Bomber spoke to me not long after Parko had, and to give me an opportunity to stay at Geelong. I mean, it's sort of a no-brainer. It's one of those things where you get one more year in your footy career. It's a town you grew up in and was born in, your family's there, and it was just great to sort of stay on. So it was. I was very lucky to play extra year, and as I said, my injuries took a toll. I remember my last game I tore my calf in the final, so that was a sign to me that it's time.
Yeah, now you probably get this question a bit, but we've got a question from a listener, actually, Lou. So he asks, is the Geelong team of 1989 to 95 the best team not to win a grand final?
Oh, gee. Well, we were certainly a very good team. That's a good question. I'm trying to think of other teams that haven't won one over in that sort of over a few years. There's probably no doubt there's few around. Having those 4 grand finals, we had a really good staff of the team, and the coaching philosophy of Blighty in particular was attacking football. They get 20 goals, we get 21, you win the game. So it was attractive footy as well. And we had the superstar himself, Gazza, up the front. And we had the non-ball brigade, which is some great on-ballers over the years. But Mark Bairstow, Paul Couch, Gary Hocking were 3 of the best ever, in my mind. And they were certainly superstars. With Billy Brownless, who, because I suppose of his media image these days, probably isn't given enough credit as far as his footy career went. He was a champion player, the Cats. Kicking over 500 goals for Geelong. And we had some really exciting players. So, look, we were probably one of those where we should have won one. Just nice to have just won one. So when you're retired and 20 years later like now, you say, well, we've won one premiership. Would have been lovely, but not to be.
Now, we mentioned old Lethal Lee before. Now, that famous assault charge incident, the big hit on Neville Bruns, how much did that affect the players and the club in general?
Well, I wasn't there at the time. I think it was the early 80s.
Oh.
I recall it. I certainly recall it very clearly at the time as well, but obviously the vision since. But I'm not sure what year it was. It might have been 84 or something.
Yeah.
So it was close to me, but it would have rocked the club and rocked the town. But it was a pretty ugly incident, the whole lot. I remember even Lee was running off the ground with a broken nose and something else. So it was a pretty spiteful clash, that one.
Yeah, now moving on post-career, I guess, I'm not sure if you had some Spice Girls blaring out of the shop and offering some Game Boys out the front, but it's one of the most 90s and 90s Geelong things especially I've ever heard. Kebabs. Tell us about kebabs.
Yes, kebabs. It wasn't big enough for any dancing people around. It was so I used to live in a place in Geelong West, and a mate of mine who was a landscape gardener at the time. So kebabs was actually early 90s. I was still playing footy. It was at the peak of my footy. And we sort of said like there was a spare spot down in a little village in Pakenham Street, it's called, where he'd work during the winter when I was busy, and during the summer I'd work when he was busy in landscaping. So it was a kebab place. So it was more or less takeaway kebabs, not at night, during the day from 9 till 4. Fast food, but it was fantastic food and coffees and all that sort of thing. And it went very well. It was only a small, tiny little place. Went for about 2 or 3 years, I think. And then Billy and I decided to go into a bigger operation in Geelong, which lasted 6 months. That was called Players on Mallet. It was a 180-seated restaurant / cafe, breakfast, lunch, dinner and licensed. And we had no idea what we were doing. So we had a lot of fun in 6 months, as you'd expect, but didn't really go much further than 6 months. For obvious reasons, I reckon.
Fair enough. Now, you mentioned your work right at the start of the show, but tell us a bit about your life now, family, anything like that?
No, we don't have any kids. We've got a four-legged Labrador. But we don't have any kids, Leanne and I, but certainly engaged and enjoying life, both working. My work, so since I retired, I've sort of been in sales for a long time. So probably from 95, my first sales job was at Valvoline Oil Company, where the great Mark McClure was my first boss in Valvoline. I think he's still there, ex-Carlton chap.
Yeah.
So I sort of went from there. And then when footy became towards sort of, I think it was 98 sort of time, I was becoming not full-time, but sort of semi-full-time. So I was either retire from footy a couple of years earlier or resign. So I finished up there and went to Conacher in Geelong for a while. So I had a number of sales jobs. When I finished footy, I studied sort of a post-diploma. I was a qualified teacher many years before that, but post-diploma in sports business, and that was where I was going to go. But sort of got involved in a few sales areas. In the last 11 years, and the last year and a half, I've been at a company called ASG Group, which is in IT consultancy, and it's been 11 years in the industry and a year and a half at ASG. So it's I never thought, Harper, in many years before, that I'd ever been in IT. It's one thing I never knew anything about, but I've been there for 11 years now, so it's all going well.
During your footy career, did you plan much for your post-career life?
Yeah, we sort of did, and I think, again, it became one of those things because for the majority of my career, we worked full-time. So we'd train at night. We sort of I'd have a full-time job. As mentioned, like Valvoline was probably one of those more corporate full-time jobs in the 90s for me. I've had a few other things before that, teaching and everything else. But we'd go to work from 8 till, say, 5 and then go to training at 5:30 and sort of work every day. So I think that's sort of, again, it's one of those natural progressions of when you do finish, you've got that sort of base behind you anyway of working. And I think I think for any player these days, I was very lucky to get to know a lot of the corporate sponsors of the footy club who are still friends of mine today. And they've been a great influence and support for me over the years. So it sort of was a bit of planning in place, and I always liked to have something in mind when I was going to finish footy because I knew it was going to eventually end. Teaching degree was there, but I thought there's other things I prefer to do. And sort of just progress from there. But I think it's really important for anyone to, in particular footy players these days, to have something planned in place so you can finish tomorrow. You can do your knee, you can do it 3 or 4 times. And we've got Dan Menzel, who's going to be a great player, and he's not playing anymore in the AFL because he had 3 or 4 knee operations. So he can finish any tick of the clock.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I've got one more listener question. This is from another Barry, and he's a big Cats fan. So, and he might be a Chris Scott Burner account, actually. He might want to get you on the coaching panel. But he asks, what 3 changes would you make to the current Cats side to turn them into a premiership team?
Oh, gee. Even personnel-wise?
Oh, well, not personnel-wise, I don't think. I think he's just talking about the general tactics or anything.
Right. Gee whiz, that's a tough one. I've got to watch a bit closer as far as the games at the moment. I think as far as just generally speaking, Geelong is obviously included in this, but just a general view of the games at the moment, and it's been a tough year. So probably try and put a little bit of this year away from the side. But the last couple of years, it's very, very congested. I think everyone speaks about that, of course, but I always think back to not going back. Nothing worse than being a past player saying back in our day. However, even late 90s and early 2000s, when even after I'd played, there were set spots on the ground, and there was always those duels. And I think the crowd and the players and the sport needs that sort of excitement in the game, and congestion makes it a pretty unattractive games at times. I think, again, it's just generally, it's not Geelong, but kicking backwards too much is annoying. And I think that's a bit of not a blight in the game, but it certainly slows it down, and all of a sudden people are fighting back and there's 16 players in the forward half. So those sort of things I think are really important. I think Geelong's they've had an amazing era the last few years. They've won 3 flags since 2007. They've been in a few prelims. They've been in finals most years. So they've been very, very good. They've got a pretty attacking. When they play attacking footy, they're unstoppable at times. And I was on sort of that old adage of attack. You need a good defence, which they do. Defence is sound, very sound for the Cats. And the forward line, when they attack, move the ball on quickly, be it by foot or hand, that's when they play their best footy, I reckon. When they start zigzagging around and chopping and changing, and slows the game down, but they're better when it's actually the ball's going forward quickly. They've got some dynamic players, and they've got to utilise those players more.
Yeah, well, I think that just about wraps us up in terms of questions, but I believe we've got a guest fan on the line. James, are you there?
I am, Harper.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Yeah, well, now we've got you on the quiz as a bit of a Jackson replacement, I guess. So it's going to be you up against Barry on the 5-question quiz. Have you listened to the show before?
I have. I've listened to a handful. Early days.
Yeah, well, I guess you'll know how it works. So, Barry, you know how it works as well. Your name's your buzzer. So,
yeah,
5.
Fair to say I got 1 out of 10 last time, so James, you got not much to beat.
Yeah, well, Andy's not here this time, so I think it might be a bit more competitive.
Yeah.
But anyway, here we go. Yeah. So, question 1. So, Geelong, it's, I guess, the second biggest city in Victoria, and a few other fairly big cities around the States and Australia. So can you rank the following Australian cities in terms of population from highest to lowest? So the 3 cities are Cairns, Newcastle and Geelong. Barry, go for it.
Newcastle, Geelong, Cairns.
Correct. So Newcastle's 7th biggest city in Australia with 480k. Geelong's 12th with 260 and Cairns is 150k, 15th. So we'll move on to question 2. Barry's 1-0 up. Question 2. So Feb 9, your birthday, Barry, yeah?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so on February 9, just this year, Parasite became the first non-English language film to win the Best Picture at the Academy Awards. What country is Parasite from?
Right.
Have you heard of the movie before, either of you?
Never heard of it.
No, I haven't.
Never heard of it? Oh, well, I'll give you a clue. It's East Asia.
Okay.
James, go for it.
Thailand.
Thailand is incorrect. Barry, do you want to have a stab in the dark?
No, I'm like a fool of myself, so I won't.
Oh, that's all right. Well, anyway, the answer is South Korea.
I wouldn't have known that.
If you've got Stan, I'd recommend giving that movie a watch. It's pretty good. It's pretty underrated, even though they've got the Academy Award, I reckon. But anyway, we'll move on to question 3. So, Barry, you were All-Australian in 92, but your name is centre-half back, even though I don't think you played centre-half back that year, which is a bit weird.
No.
But anyway, so can you name the 3 centre-half forwards from the 90s in the All-Australian teams? James just got in.
Wayne Carey.
Yeah, continue.
Stuart Lowe.
Yeah, and one more.
Corey McKernan.
Corey McKernan is incorrect. Barry, do you want to have a go?
Yeah. Would it be Chris Grant?
Chris Grant's correct. Well done. Yeah, famous Dogs player, of course.
Yeah, great player.
Yeah, Barry doing much better than last time. 2-0 up. So we'll move on to question 4. So born in 68, Barry, on January the 21st, 1968, which battle of the Vietnam War, made even more famous by song, began? It's a pretty famous Aussie song, James.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah, the Battle of Khe Sanh is correct. So that's 2-1 to Barry. It's heating up, but as you've both listened to the show or been on the show before, last question is who am I? So we're going to go down from 5 points with a series of clues all the way down to 1 point, and once you've buzzed in, you can't buzz in again until you've gotten it wrong. So all good with that, guys?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so James, you need 2 points to take the win here. So for 5 points, I'm a former footballer, Aussie rules footballer, who was born on the 3rd of June 1983 and played 208 games. I'll move on. This might be a bit tough from the 5 points, so I'll move on to the 4 points. A physical defender. I only kicked 29 AFL goals over my career at the one big Victorian club. Anyone want to have a crack, or should I continue?
Please continue.
Okay, I'll go on to the 3.1. So I was listed at 193 centimetres tall, and I was named on the half-back flank in the 2009 All-Australian team, the same year in which I became captain of the club that drafted me as a mature age recruit in 2004.
You got me here. They're hard, these ones.
I can go into the 2 points, but James, you need to get on the 2 points to win. Should I keep going?
Yes, I got no idea at this stage.
Yeah, bit tough. So for 2 points, despite playing in 3 grand finals in over 2 years of the early 2010s, I only won 1 premiership. So
Sorry, Collingwood player, is he?
I can't give you that, but you can have a guess.
Barry.
Barry?
No, the one club player, wasn't he? Not James. I say James Clement.
No, that's incorrect. So do you want to have a go, James?
What club did it play at, Harper?
Oh, I can't tell you that, but I can. All I'm saying is that it was a big Victorian club, and he played in 3 grand finals in 2 years of the early 2010s. So you can probably work out the club from that.
Oh, Brendan Goddard.
Brendan Goddard is incorrect. So you're both back in it now, so I'll move on to the 1 point. But James, you can go for the draw, and we'll do a tiebreaker question if you get it here. So for 1 point, following Nathan Buckley's retirement... James?
Nick Maxwell.
Nick Maxwell is correct. He's tied it up at 2-2, and we've got to go to a tiebreaker question.
Good St Joey's boy, Nick Maxwell. Good St Joey's boy.
Yeah, that's...
Geelong boy.
I make all the questions related to your career, Barry, so St Joey's, that's why I chose Nick Maxwell. We're going to go closest to the pin for this one. What is the population of Geelong?
Barry. Okay. Present day. So 350,000.
350,000 is incorrect, but I'll throw over to you, James, because it's closest to the pin.
200,000.
200,000 is also incorrect, but as Barry said, wait, what did you say, Barry? Did you say 350 or 300?
350.
350. Oh, so James just edges it out. It's 253,269. So congratulations, James. You've taken the win against Barry Stoneham.
Thank you very much, Harper. Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks.
Well done, James.
Thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, well done, Barry. Thanks for the contest.
Thanks, mate. Another losing grand final.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, probably one of the big highlights of your career. But I think we'll just leave it there for now. So massive thanks for coming on, Barry and James, of course.
Thanks, Harper.
Thanks very much, Harper. No worries at all.
Oh, how good was that? Usually I've got Jackson to back me up, and he says, Harper, that was bloody good, but Jackson's not here. It's only me, and I'll just back myself up. That was very, very good. Absolute cracker of an episode with the great Barry Stoneham. A massive thank you for coming on again, Barry, if you're listening. So Barry mentioned in the podcast that he had a job at Valvoline, and now he's in IT, which is a bit of a weird career route for a former footy player to take. But you had quite a few of those back in the day where all the players had full-time jobs, back in the old retro footy. So there's been some famous ones. There's been cops and firefighters and farmers, all kinds of things. So we're going to put something up on the socials. I won't talk too much about it in the outro itself, but we'll put something up on the socials. What are your favourite jobs of former footy players back in the day when they all had full-time jobs? So if you want to check out the question and reply to it, have a look at WDWB Pod. That's WDWB Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And we're at Where Do We Begin on Facebook, or facebook.com/WDWB Pod. And so we'll put something up there. Make sure you reply to it, or give us an email as well. That's in the description down below. But we're going to continue on the music thing we've been doing for the last few weeks. I've absolutely loved this, and I hope you guys all have too. So we try to get the name out there of some up-and-coming bands that might not be so well known to mainstream society and be listened to by many mainstream ears, but these guys are absolutely worthwhile. We only get people on if they're worthwhile, and this band is an absolute cracker. They take a lot of inspiration from AC/DC. They call them Australia's greatest ever rock outfit, which I think is pretty undeniable. So they pay homage to some old school rock music the only way they know how, by rocking hard with guitars blazing, attitude dripping, sweat-sustained heads banging, and testosterone-pumping high-energy rock and roll that puts the heart and soul back into Australian rock, in the words of the band themselves. So the band is called Rockin' Volts, and they're made up of a few members. On drums is Dean, and you've got Hayden as well on vocals and bass, and Dylan on guitar, and you've got, of course, Tyler on guitar and vocals. So these guys released a debut EP back in September last year, a while ago, but it's a self-titled track called Rockin' Volts by Rockin' Volts, obviously. So we're going to get into that. But just before I do, if you are a musician and you're interested in getting your stuff on the show, give us an email. We're at wheredowebeginpod@gmail.com. So make sure you give us an email if you want to get your music on the show. But I think I should stop waffling on, and I'll get straight into the track. Here it is, Rockin' Volts by Rockin' Volts.
and the rock they shared. This is for the people in the house, and we hope you came prepared. From the girls to the man, this is what to do. Just keep on rocking.